A document from Washington has proven to be more destructive than any sanctions. On February 21, 2025, the U.S. Trade Representative proposed a new fee, charging up to $1.5 million in port fees for Chinese-made ships entering U.S. ports, directly undermining the foundation of China's shipbuilding industry. The market reaction in March was alarming, as Japanese shipyards swept up global bulk carrier orders, while Chinese shipyards received none. The Chinese Communist Party's boast of being a shipbuilding superpower was swiftly shattered by this move from the U.S. In line with the March 17 review of major shipping lanes by U.S. Federal Maritime Commission and rumors about Chinese billionaire Li Ka-shing selling 43 ports, the U.S. seems to be building a firewall in global shipping, aiming to exclude China from the international shipping system. This isn't just a trade dispute, it's a deadly strike against the CCP's economic lifeline. The U.S. policy targets China's bulk carriers, the main vessels for transporting exports to the U.S., which are also the backbone of shipbuilding industry orders. A bulk carrier costs over $100 million to build, and a single voyage costs several million dollars. Now, the additional $1.5 million toll raises costs by 15 to 20%. According to Clarkson Research Services, the toll could theoretically rise to $3.5 million US, and with multiple trips per year, the extra cost could accumulate to tens of millions of dollars. Foreign buyers are now too scared to place orders with Chinese shipbuilders. Coal exports are being ignored, while the costs for oil and natural gas are surging. This is just the beginning. Data from Howe Robinson Partners Dry Bulk Research Director Bilal Muftuglu highlights the impact. In the first quarter of 2025, only 13 bulk carrier orders were placed by China, with 12 in January and just 1 in February and then none in March. This unprecedented plunge stands in stark contrast to Japan, which secured 21 new ship orders in the same period, successfully taking market share from China. The impact isn't limited to new ship orders. Even second-hand Chinese ships are suffering. Bloomberg's latest data is shocking. In March 2025, only 4 second-hand Chinese bulk carriers were sold, the lowest in 3 years, amounting to just 20% of last year's monthly average. Meanwhile, Japan and South Korea maintained steady sales of 20 to 25 second-hand ships per month. The price difference is even more painful. Before the USTR proposal, Japanese bulk carriers were $4.8 million more expensive than Chinese ones. Now the difference has increased to $5.8 million. Though Japanese ships are pricier, buyers are willing to pay the extra $1 million. Data from SSY brokers shows that the discount on Chinese new bulk carriers has reached the highest level since early 2023. But still, no one is buying. The market is using real money to vote, and it's pushing Chinese shipyards into the mud. The global shipbuilding order data from March 2025 clearly shows the market shift. South Korean shipyards secured orders for 820,000 compensated gross tons, capturing 55% of the global market, while China only received 520,000 tons, reducing its market share to 35%, the worst performance since 2022. The situation is even worse in the high-end ship market. South Korean shipyards monopolized all LNG and specialty ship orders, while Chinese shipyards barely managed to secure a few low-end bulk carrier and small container ship orders, essentially relegating them to the margins of the market. The world's top 10 shipping companies are clearly feeling the panic, with many reassessing their relationships with Chinese shipyards. Mediterranean Shipping Company and CMA-CGM have begun reconsidering their orders in China, while Maersk has directly frozen a $2.4 billion plan to build 12 methanol-powered ships. ExxonMobil canceled orders for 2 LNG bunkering ships, and large companies are starting to shift their shipping orders from China to the U.S. According to a Dutch international law firm, the U.S. step-by-step fees are causing global buyers to cancel their orders, while charter companies are busy renegotiating contracts. Chinese shipyards, once filled with a queue of orders, are now finding themselves with no one interested. From 1999, when China's market share was less than 5%, to 2023, when it surpassed 50%, the rise of China's shipbuilding industry has made the U.S. uneasy. The U.S. Jones Act of 1920 protected its own shipbuilding industry, and now the $1.5 million port fee is a modern version of that act, aimed at weakening China. Chinese reports state that the shipbuilding industry directly provides around 600,000 jobs, impacting the livelihoods of 600,000 families. That to the millions of indirect workers, steel plant workers, valve manufacturers, propeller makers, and dashboard assemblers all depend on this industry. Orders have sharply declined, and the demand for shipbuilding steel plates has dropped by 30%. Steel and bow steel's production capacity utilization rate has fallen below 60%, while China's Shipbuilding Industry Corporation has laid off 2,000 employees, and funding for LNG dual fuel and smart ship research has shrunk by 15 billion yuan. Economists warn that this round of attacks is even worse than the 2018 trade war, which already cost China 3.5 million manufacturing jobs. This time, the scale is larger, and the consequences are more severe. The port fees have added to the burden on China's exports. Each container now costs an additional $600 to $800, and inspection fees have skyrocketed from $1,000 to $5,000. The profit margins in the electronics industry, usually between 8% and 12%, now face a 15% cost increase due to the added port and various fees, forcing manufacturers to raise prices. In the machinery and equipment industry, where profit margins are 10 to 15%, a 12% cost increase has led U.S. buyers to turn to Japanese and South Korean products. China's leading company, Sany Heavy Industry, has already felt the impact. The garment and textile industry, which already operates on thin margins of 3 to 5%, is being hit even harder, with some clothing factories in Ningbo being forced to close production lines due to a 25% increase in costs. The agricultural product industry, with even lower profit margins of 1 to 3%, has completely lost its competitive edge, with a 50% increase in costs making their products unsellable. Polyethylene export costs have surged from 8,000 yuan per ton to 12,000 yuan, turning profits into losses. Professor Shi Heling from Monash University in Australia points out that quite a few companies have already decided to shut down. Factory closures are like a domino effect. The CCP's economy, which has relied on exports for decades, has had its lifeblood cut off by a single move from Washington. The overall situation for China is becoming more dire. On March 17, 2025, the U.S. Federal Maritime Commission launched a special review of 7 major maritime routes. These are the Singapore Strait, the Malacca Strait, the Suez Canal, the Strait of Gibraltar, the English Channel, the Panama Canal, and the Arctic route, which control 90% of global bulk commodity transportation. The U.S. also plans to impose a 30% transit fee on Chinese ships passing through the Panama Canal, and may even block the canal, cutting off China's resource trade with Brazil and Argentina. This would sever the lifeline of China's Belt and Road Initiative because the U.S. deems China's shipbuilding industry unreasonable. If further restrictions are imposed, Chinese ships won't even be able to pass through these key routes. Ship owners are in a dilemma. If they don't replace their ships, they'll pay more money. But if they replace them, they must have ship built in other countries. This means no more orders for Chinese shipyards, and China will no longer use Chinese-built ships on U.S. routes. The global supply chain is accelerating its decoupling from China. Data from Motive indicates that in April 2025, freight volume bookings from China dropped by 41% compared to the previous month and 35% from the same time last year. Shipping routes from Asia to the U.S. have started to bypass Singapore and Busan in South Korea, leading to a 15% drop in cargo handling at major Chinese ports like Shanghai. While Singapore's port throughput surged by 20%, Chinese ship leasing companies, which own 400 ships worth about $12 billion now face the risk of their contracts being terminated, with Greek ship owners taking advantage of the situation to acquire these assets at a 30% discount. Goods transshipped through Prince Rupert Port in Canada now have a transportation cycle extended from 35 days to 50 days, with shipping costs rising by 40%. If U.S. financial giant BlackRock successfully acquires 43 global strategic ports from Chinese billionaire Li Ka-shing, it could track the flow of Chinese goods in real time. This would allow the U.S. to more precisely target the global supply chains of Chinese companies like Huawei and BYD. This is why China has stopped the deal for now. However, the deal hasn't been completely cancelled yet. If the U.S. successfully acquires ports globally and controls major terminals, Chinese ships will have nowhere to dock, essentially becoming isolated on the seas. The rise of China's manufacturing has fundamentally changed the previous model, where developed countries monopolized high-end technology and earned 80% of the profits. During Trump's first term, tariffs reduced Chinese employment by 2.7%, and now the new tariffs are even harsher. For the shipbuilding industry, it's the combined effect of port fees and tariffs, pushing China's manufacturing exports to the brink of collapse. U.S. Federal Maritime Commission Chairman Luis Sola openly stated that the U.S. intends to retaliate, offsetting China's subsidies to its shipbuilding industry and investing the fees collected from Chinese ships into the development of U.S. domestic shipbuilding. On March 14th, the G7 foreign ministers issued a joint statement that openly hyped the China threat, even removing the reference to the One China policy, thereby legitimizing the U.S. port review actions. The global shipping industry is heavily reliant on Chinese ships, and the U.S. fears that the CCP could use this as a weapon, prompting the U.S. to take a preemptive strategy. On March 15th, the U.S. military began airstrikes against the Houthi rebels to secure the Red Sea. The U.S. has also demanded that, within 7 years, the proportion of U.S.-flagged ships among those going to the U.S. be increased to 15%, and the proportion of U.S.-built ships be raised to 5%. The U.S.'s precise strike on China's shipbuilding industry also shows that the current international trade order is one set by the U.S. The CCP was able to stir things up within the system because the U.S. didn't take action. But once the U.S. decided to act, it took just a month for China's shipbuilding industry to be brought to its knees. The port fee dispute is, in essence, an attempt to completely exclude China, and ordinary Chinese people have heard Washington's message. If you look at Germany, the average hourly rate is $30, while in the U.S. it's $22. Thailand has an hourly wage of $4, while China is at a pitiful 80 cents, ranking among the lowest in the world. However, China's average working hours is the highest in the world, reaching 2,200 hours. The U.S. is at 1,610 hours and Germany at 1,400 hours. There's one more surprising thing. The U.S. administrative spending only accounts for 3.4% of GDP. Japan's is at 2.8%, while China's administrative expenses take up 25% of GDP. Education and healthcare costs account for 21.5% of GDP in China. A study by Tsinghua University professor Bai Chong-en found that China's social insurance contributions have reached 40% of wage levels, and in some regions they exceed 50%. Chinese social insurance contributions are 4.6 times higher than in its East Asian neighbors. Yet, even with these high contributions, the social insurance deficit has already exceeded 2.35 trillion yuan in 2020, and this gap is widening every year. Additionally, the tax burden in China is also heavy. 14% income tax, 12% housing fund, 8% pension insurance, and 4% medical and unemployment insurance, and then you're hit with a 17% value-added tax on the goods you buy. China's class divide is getting worse, and working conditions are not getting any better. Despite high taxes and long working hours, wages remain low. Chinese businesses, for the most part, divide their profits among shareholders and high-ranking executives. They have no intention of investing in factories, updating equipment, or improving employee benefits. Their tactic is to grab projects and pocket the money, cutting costs wherever possible and delaying everything. Employees' wages are minimized, factory machines are outdated, and travel expenses are delayed for reimbursement. The result is that wealth is concentrated in the hands of a few, while lower-level employees work hard without basic guarantees. Factory conditions worsen over time, and the wealth gap in Chinese society has become alarmingly severe. In the U.S., although there is an issue with corporate profits skewed toward upper management, the gap between the two is like night and day compared to China. The U.S. has seen this. During the globalization process after the Cold War, the American middle class quickly declined, and its social structures shifted from a traditional spindle shape to a polarized dumbbell shape. A typical example is that Detroit auto workers' hourly wage fell sharply from $35 to $15, leading to economic distress in the Rust Belt. The U.S. doesn't want to repeat China's extreme wealth disparity, so it started adjusting policies to reduce the benefits it gave to China. The CCP, however, responded with outrage and criticism. The U.S. gave China decades of benefits, only to receive bitter hatred in return. Now the U.S. is taking it all back. The trade and tariff issues between the U.S. and China could have been resolved through negotiations, but the CCP's insistence on confrontation has led the situation into a full decoupling, and it will ultimately suffer the consequences. When the shipbuilding industry collapses, the economy declines, and social unrest spreads, the CCP still expects ordinary people to pay the price for its rule. China's model involves sacrificing the majority to maintain the lavish lifestyles of the few. This is the ideal world envisioned by the CCP, but it is neither what Americans nor what Chinese people truly desire. The greatest fortune of living in today's world is the freedom to choose. If you're dissatisfied with the current situation, you can choose to leave, and you don't have to be cannon fodder for a certain nation or dynasty. A single proposal from the US has not only destroyed China's shipbuilding industry, but has also shaken the economic foundation of the CCP's rule. As public awareness grows and resistance rises, the collapse of this regime may come sooner than expected. Trump's strategy is to apply pressure first, and if the opponent does not yield, continue to increase pressure until they collapse or compromise.